Very good afternoon. I'm Annika Hedberg. I'm Head of Sustainable Prosperity for Europe program at EPC. I'll be joined today with a great panel of speakers to discuss climate action, role of the individual. And we're very pleased to organize the discussion today with Open Society European Policy Institute, as well as Citra, the Finnish Innovation Fund. Before we start with the discussion, I'll just go through some of the practicalities. If you're interested to ask questions, there are two ways for you to do that. I'll give you opportunities to speak out, and you can also ask written questions in the space provided, but just please do keep your questions short. Damyana Stoynova, she will have to leave by 14:45. So if you have specific questions for her, it would be great if you can write them in the space provided, and I'll try to pick on them before she leaves. And otherwise, we're of course extremely happy to hear all your other comments, questions during the Q&A. As for the topic of today, we know that citizens are a central piece of the puzzle to effective climate action. No matter are we talking about reducing greenhouse gas emissions in energy, mobility, or food systems, if people are engaged and participating in the transition, they can complement measures taken by policymakers and businesses, and as such play an important role in bringing about the change. It's our lifestyles, our behavior, including how we live, move, and how and what we consume, that really does matter. And our willingness to contribute to climate action, or even actively demand new products and services, can drive change. While we hope to discuss today the role of citizens in addressing climate change and the impact individuals can have in bringing about change, we also like to touch upon the barriers that hinder people from contributing to climate action and tools that policymakers and other stakeholders can use to empower citizens to play a role. And in this context, we'll be touching upon the role for the Climate Pact, as well as the role for behavioral insights and nudging, and how data and existing knowledge on habits and behaviors could be used to feed back into the policy and decision making to further accelerate climate action. To get us started, we're extremely pleased to have Damyana Stoynova, member of the Executive Vice President Timmermans' Cabinet from the European Commission. To get us started, what tools does the EU have at its disposal to enhance citizens' role in climate action? Thank you, Damyana.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be invited to this event and to be part of this discussion. As you have already introduced me, I work in the cabinet of the Executive Vice President Timmermans, and one of the topics that I'm covering is in exactly the European Climate Pact. So I'm very happy to be here today and to share with you some insight into what exactly we are preparing prior to the launch of the Climate Pact. But let me start a little bit with the big picture and with the European Green Deal that was launched at the very beginning of this Commission, which is basically our plan for a sustainable European economy. Now, with COVID, it has become also our strategy to get out of the crisis and to recover in a sustainable way. The European Green Deal is guided by our long-term objective, which is to become climate neutral by 2050, and it is a comprehensive set of different policies and strategies that should bring us there. But as part of the Green Deal, we have come up also with the idea of the European Climate Pact that was already announced in the political guidelines also of the President, and that we are currently preparing. Our plan is to launch the Climate Pact by the end of the year, beginning of December, to be more precise. And we would launch it with a communication and also with a big launch event that we're currently working on. So the Climate Pact is about bringing together different organizations, stakeholders, from schools to big multinational companies, or basically citizens at large, and to invite them to get active on climate change and also to induce behavioral change. It is really the place where we would like citizens to have a say, but also where they could play their part and can contribute to the climate policies and to the climate action in Europe. As we're envisaging it, the Climate Pact should have two main pillars. The first one is about awareness raising and sharing information. And the second one is about participation and supporting action. In the context of awareness raising, we have come up also with the concept of Climate Pact ambassadors. And this role would be open for every citizen that is interested to join, for individuals or also for organizations if they want to nominate an individual to be a climate ambassador. And their role would be to reach out to their communities, to participate and to organize events and basically to contribute to this aspect of awareness raising. Then when it comes to action, we are working also on an online platform where, again, citizens or organizations will have the opportunity to make a climate pledge. There we are also looking to work with other international partners to make this work. And the pledges would be, again, bottom up, inspired by the ideas of different individuals, organizations, and one could be able to launch a pledge themselves or also to join pledges of others. And the pact would be also a place to connect ideas, to connect stakeholders, to match, for instance, also ideas with available funding. When we developed the pact, we are not starting from scratch though, because there are already so many existing grassroots initiatives. Just to mention a few, for instance, the European Covenant of Mayors that is bringing together cities and regions that have even more ambitious targets than their national governments. Or I would like to mention also the youth movement, which you know has been very active in bringing climate very high on the political agenda. And as our Executive Vice President Timmermans says, if it was not for the youth movement, there wouldn't be a Green Deal at all. So it's important to acknowledge the important role that they have played, but also that citizens at large are able to play, and that now with the pact we want to amplify and to provide this space, to provide this stage without trying to co-opt what is already there, because we don't think that citizens or stakeholders necessarily need the Commission in order to empower them and to give them this space, but we would like to facilitate that and to do everything that we can in order to connect people, to give them this visibility and to support their action. I would like to mention also that prior to the launch of the pact, we had a public consultation which received a lot of replies. We had 3,500 respondents from all over Europe, and it just confirmed once again that there is a lot of interest there, and that there are a lot of people who would like to be part of it. And maybe just as a last remark, I would like to stress that the pact will be also an evolving project. So we would launch some building blocks towards the end of the year, but we expect this to live and to grow based on the ideas and engagement of the people who would like to be part of it. So not everything can be anticipated from the very beginning. It's also a new exercise for us, for the Commission, because there are not many similar initiatives that we have launched before. So it's also a learning exercise to a certain extent, but it's something that we would like to do together. And we hope for the success of the Climate Pact, because we see this as a very important complement to all the other policies and legislation that we are doing. And it's really the space where the citizens will be at the center of it, and where they would have a very important role to play. Thank you very much, and also apologize that indeed I would need to leave a little bit earlier, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them now, or you could reach me also anytime by email after the event. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this overview. And indeed, if there are any questions, you can also write them in the text box provided, and I'll try to pick on them before we start with the Q&A. As our next speaker, we have Hendrik Bruns, Policy Analyst for Foresight Modeling and Behavior Insights, as well as Design at the Joint Research Centre at the European Commission. Looking at behavioural interventions, we see that this is not a new thing, and they've been used in the past. And it would be interesting to know some of the work that you've been engaged in the past, as well as what are the prospects for going ahead, and how could behavioral insights help to contribute to Green Deal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Annika. I hope everyone can hear me, and I hope you can see my slides. Since I'm from the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, as a proper scientist, I of course prepared some PowerPoint slides. And I would like to explain a bit what the Joint Research Center, or specifically our Competence Center on Behavioral Insights, has been doing, is currently doing, and will be doing most likely in the future on all the aspects relevant to the European Green Deal. In the past, some of you might, well, most of you probably will be aware of it. In European policy, the notion or the use of behavioral sciences, so behavioral economics, social psychology, social sciences, has been used to inform certain policies. For example, here you can see an example of such a policy initiative, that people can see their own energy usage in comparison to all their neighbors, or in comparison to any kind of reference group. This is an example from the USA, but it looks relatively similar in European context. And this relies on a relatively solid evidence, empirical and experimental evidence, that such comparison leads people to become more energy efficient, so to use less energy. Another example is, for example, that most of you or all of you will have seen are energy labels on certain appliances, for example, here on refrigerators. It has been a certain development of how these labels are being designed. First, it started with a label of A, where A is the best, to G, where G is the worst energy efficiency. Then this was changed in 2010 to an A+++ to F or D label. And now I think it's implemented next year, iteratively, that because of behavioral evidence that shows that people are better at understanding the A to G label, this will be going back to the A to G label. This also relies on a solid evidence that such types of labels can really lead people to buy more efficient and less energy intensive appliances. This is what I labeled here as the past. Of course, still, this is what is like labeling is still a very important policy instrument at the European Commission, and it still plays a role and will play a role in the future. But what we now in the Competence Center of Behavioral Insights are thinking about, because the European Green Deal is a relatively young policy initiative or relatively young communication, we are now starting to think, how can we best structure our contribution to this? And the way we are seeing it at the moment is that it's totally fine and very helpful for policymakers and scientists to have a behavioral view on climate change. So you can look at climate change from a social, from a technological, from an economic, from a political glasses or from a perspective, and we are looking at it from a behavioral perspective, naturally. But I mean, climate change is one of the biggest challenges in the world, and behavior is one aspect. You can see on the right-hand side, their politics plays a role. They could have included many more aspects. Technology is a very big provider, and of course, they interrelate to behavior, but it's not that behavior is the only way or the only factor that influences climate change. It's one aspect. And of course, behavioral scientists focus on this aspect. But we want to make sure that it's not a panacea. So behavioral interventions, the ones that I just introduced you to, they are not the silver bullet to the climate problem, because climate change is a huge problem, and only focusing on behavioral levers or on behavioral interventions will not solve the problem by its own. That's why we label it here more as complements. They can also be substitutes in certain areas, but they can also be very, very important complements, for example, on top on carbon pricing, for example, or on more conventional interventions like bans and regulations. But the good thing is that behavioral interventions can have side benefits, so they can provide a certain framing or a certain view or presentation mode of conventional policies, for example, carbon taxes. For example, it can help carbon taxes become more accepted in the in the society, because it improves how people understand this. For example, there has been some research that people theoretically would assume that you would start with low carbon taxes, that increase over time for consumers so that they can learn to behave with this, they can learn to adapt to their income. But it has been shown, for example, based on behavioral experiments, that people actually prefer constant cost profiles instead of increasing cost profiles. This is, for example, one contribution that behavioral insights can provide to better understand more traditional or more conventional green policies, such as carbon pricing, for example. And they can also, and this is of course relevant here, help to structure the participatory process. And this is also where we are still learning. So how can behavioral insights contribute there? One aspect is, for example, we can better understand the political narratives. So quite an extensive amount of the views that people have on carbon reduction policies or on climate change as a whole is based on political beliefs, and behavioral insights can help to understand these beliefs. For the future, this just as a present, so how we are seeing at the moment to come up with some sort of European behavioral Green Deal. So to understand the various aspects of the European Green Deal in terms of their implications for individual behavior. And in the future, so as I already said, sustainability labels, reparability labels are still important. Sustainability food labels still relevant to look at. There's an emergent focus on food waste reduction. And of course, within the Climate Pact pledges, to better understand how people pledge, why they pledge, also how good pledges are to commit people to actually also following up on their pledges, not just pledge without doing anything. So we want to understand this better, and of course also, as I already hinted at, to better understand the narratives and the effects of narratives and framings of climate change on people's behavior. And the last point, very important thing for us is we want to bring policymakers and behavioral insights experts closer together. It should be a global thing across the European Commission, but we think that this can profit very much the European Green Deal. That's it for me. Thank you very much. Here's some information on me and our group. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's good to see how actually long already the behavioral insights have been influencing policymaking, and going forward, obviously taking the challenge that we face with climate action, it's essential that this becomes much more integrated part of the policymaking so that we really can benefit from behavioral insights in making sure that the actions we design are as effective as possible and that there is a buy-in for them as well. So thank you very much for this overview, and we'll be happy to come back to the remarks made there. As our next speaker, we have Heather Grabbe, Director at Open Society European Policy Institute. Heather, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, as Damyana was saying at the beginning, the individual is vital for the democratic part of the Green Deal, and also in terms of making good policy. And of course, Hendrik's just shown us a nice image of the two-way flow between behavioural insights experts and policymakers. There's also an important two-way flow between individuals, as citizens, as consumers, as voters, and policymakers, because we're entering uncharted territory. The fundamental thing that makes the Green Deal different from every other policy initiative that the European Commission has ever undertaken, including the Single Market Programme, is the scale of the transformation that it unleashes. The Green Deal brings a fundamental transformation to economies and societies. And for that reason, not only is it vital to have individual buy-in and the behavioural change on the part of individuals to make it happen, it's also essential that individuals are convinced it needs to happen to maintain democratic consent over what could be a long and rather complex transition, where each time they vote, they don't necessarily know what the implications of what they're voting for will be, either for their own lives or for their society as a whole. So behavioural change at the individual level is critical to successful reduction of emissions and to prevent biodiversity collapse. But the role of the individual as a voter is also crucial to sustain democratic consent. And for that reason, the notion of a just transition, a fair transition to a carbon neutral economy is fundamental. And that's why fairness and justice are at the heart of the work that Open Society and Foundations is doing in this area. Now, we've just undertaken a very interesting opinion poll survey across Europe. We commissioned that with DPART, a research group in Germany, to look at how much individuals actually know about climate change and what's the relationship between what they know and what they're prepared to do. And that turns out to be an absolutely vital relationship. There is, in fact, a direct correlation between their understanding and their accurate knowledge of how much change is coming and what creates the most emissions and therefore would reduce emissions the best, and what they're prepared to support, either to do in their own lives or they're prepared to support their governments to do or the EU to do. They're increasingly aware of their role as consumers, but as citizens, they're still not very aware of the system change that's coming. They still don't really see that this is going to change everything. They think it's still one policy among many. It will involve some marginal changes, but not necessarily that it's going to change their own lives very much. And that's the case even in Germany, where awareness is highest. So these are very interesting findings. And we looked at 6 countries in Europe as well as the United States to find out what people thought. And it's extremely interesting to see what kinds of climate action they support, as well as the potential for organized resistance to try to disrupt the democratic consensus that currently exists on climate change. So just to give you some of the preliminary findings, most Europeans, the vast majority, are aware of climate change, and they recognize that it is caused by human activity, at least to some extent. What they're a little more confused about is the degree of scientific consensus about it. There's still a significant number of Europeans who believe, fewer than Americans, but still, who believe that scientists are divided, even equally divided, on whether human activity is causing climate change, whereas in reality, 97% of scientists believe that. So there's clearly work to be done in terms of probing the soft skepticism, the kind of soft denialism that could be whipped up and is being encouraged by certain US-based groups which are already doing campaigning in Europe. Another very important finding is that Europeans overwhelmingly support climate action. And on an individual level, many of them are already taking action or considering doing so. However, what kind of action they're prepared to undertake themselves, or that their governments or that they think that the EU should undertake, is another story. It's quite tricky because although they were asked about a range of different potential factors, reducing meat consumption, driving less, using public transport more, using flights less, and they still don't have a terribly clear idea about what would reduce the emissions the best and the most. And that's why the Citra research that we're going to hear about shortly is very important, because it does provide citizens with exactly those tools. So just a heads up that this really does matter according to our research. But many Europeans underestimate the degree of humanity's contribution to climate change. They don't know how severe it's going to be, and they have no idea about the urgency and scale of action that's needed to address it. They're still seeing it as something they have to adapt to. For example, 46% in Germany think they will need to adapt to climate change, whereas only 32% say that there will be a severely negative impact on their lives. And that figure for Germany, 32%, is by far the highest. It's much smaller in other countries. The Czech Republic is the real outlier, where there's a real lack of understanding about it. And when they were asked how to reduce the climate challenge, people put great responsibility on the state, more than on themselves as individuals. And also they put a lot of responsibility on supranational institutions such as the EU. So there is an understanding that it's a bigger challenge than what individuals alone can possibly address, but they still aren't seeing a role for themselves in the collective action. They mostly undertake or consider undertaking consumer actions, for example, buying fewer goods that contain plastic, whereas they're much more reluctant to engage in collective actions like voting for a party based on its climate agenda, or even going to a climate protest. Now that varies enormously by age, and so the point made earlier by Damyana about how it's the younger Europeans out on the streets who've made all the difference in terms of political will, absolutely. It's the youngest age group between the ages of 15 and 25 who are in favour of much more radical action and prepared to do a great deal more than everybody over the age of 25. There are variations, but that gap of the under 25s is really huge. And, you know, some of them are voting, they will all be voting soon, so they matter a great deal. only 67% have no intention of participating in an environmental protest. This is in general, this is all age groups, or donating, and 54% wouldn't donate to one. So we've got to think carefully about where the support is going to come from. And many people are not able to identify the most impactful personal actions. In Italy, Poland, and Spain, for example, 60% of people think that reducing waste and recycling more is the best thing you can do, whereas only 4 to 8% said that driving cars less is a very important contribution to emissions. This is quite a shocking statistic given what the climate science is telling us. And the measures that they envisage taking in their own lives is also matched by what they want to see governments doing. They basically want to see incentives rather than bans or taxation as a means of changing behaviour across the board. So they don't really see a massive system change is going to happen. So many people say they want the government to make public transport free of charge. That's the top choice in 5 of the 6 countries, or similar incentives. And the idea of curbing or taxing activities that harm the climate is still pretty unpopular. Now that point goes against what Citra has found, and so I'll be very interested to hear what the Citra results on that. But just to point out, that's a point of contrast in the data. So the challenge is therefore less to address climate denial, at least in Europe, than to address a widespread, rather soft skepticism and lukewarmism about the urgency of climate action and how radical it needs to be. And as we've seen with other issues like migration over the past years, soft skepticism can become hard skepticism very quickly if populist leaders ride the wave and if they start to exploit it as a wedge issue and in order to make the EU and indeed the national governments unpopular. So it's very important to address the micro wars that are already happening at local level around everyday issues, be that everything from coal mining in Poland, for example, but also through to questions about meat and what impact it has on emissions. So projects like Citra's, just to conclude, is really important because of the educational component, because of fostering behavioural change, and it has the leverage to encourage people to start thinking about the kind of system change that is bound to happen. And that's also important because participatory democracy is going to become more and more important in the climate transition. As Damyana was pointing out earlier, the engagement of citizens is vital, and the participatory mechanisms like, for example, deliberative processes and climate assemblies, these are really good ways of drawing people in so that they understand better, they get the science and the data, they can make individual decisions that will affect them as citizens, as voters, and as consumers. And that's really what we need to see in order to seize the window of opportunity for system change and then to maintain the democratic consent over a long series of elections ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather, for this overview. It's great to hear the results of your study. I'm sure that the others will like to pick on this, but you also mentioned a number of times the Citra study, which provides a fantastic bridge for our next speaker, Sari, Laine, a leading specialist for sustainable everyday life at the Finnish Innovation Fund, Citra. Please tell us more about the work that you've done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being a part of this great group. I'm happy to be one of the panelists. Can you see my screen now? The sustainable everyday life presentation.
Yes.
All right, good. So yeah, I'm going to provide some concrete action that we have done in Finland last 4 years that we've been engaging our citizens to live more sustainably. Like we all know, IPCC brought us the drastic thing that we need to lower our CO2 emissions drastically if we want to keep in the 1.5 degrees the global warming. In Finland, average Finnish has now about 10,000 kilograms of CO2 emissions, and we need to, by 2030, it should be 2,500. Based on our calculations from the 1.5 Lifestyle report. And these are all consumption-based CO2 emissions. So there might be a different kind of numbers. So when 4 years we started, this is the starting point. people actually thought that sustainability sucks, because it's always been that you need to stop driving, you need to stop eating the meat, you need to just decrease, diminish, minimize, don't do anything. Everything fun will be away from your life. So this is the beginning, kind of the starting point. And then, like Heather already said, that we have these huge misunderstandings. This is A.T. Kearney last year did a research about in Germany, what people thinks or believes that has an impact on reducing CO2 and what actually does. And as we can see, the no more plastic bags is highly overestimated. 22% of people think that that's kind of the key. Well, it's 3 kilos of CO2 emissions per person. And then again, no more meat consumption, only 10% thinks that's kind of the key. And as you can see, there is a huge impact on that. So we think that we don't want to change, we don't want to give up all the good and fun things from our life, and then we have these huge misunderstandings. When we started 4 years ago, we kind of thought that, okay, maybe we can get everybody on board with just the environmental messaging. So what are the other motivations that we can kind of piggyback and give the messages through the other motivations to people? And we did this motivation survey, and in Finland there is a kind of this need and practicality that came really strongly up. I don't know if maybe it's our climate or something, but we are really practical people. But there are also saving time, saving money. We like products that have a long life and durability, but also bringing joy to me and my family is there. And as you can see, environmental friendliness there, but it's many times a bonus. So there is something that you need to do as a main motivation. And if it's environmentally friendly, that's a good thing as well. There's a lot of lists that what you should do. And we also saw all the lists. And we went through our specialist in here in Finland, and we asked, so what are the most impactful lists? And we always got the different kind of a list. So we thought, okay, maybe we should actually calculate this. So we have about 100 smart ways in our website, and there you actually can sort them the way that which is the large environmental impact, or what has a small environmental impact, but also what is around the living, food, services, and that way. One thing I want to say about these actions is that they're all written the positive way. So there is a kind of the behavioral science that we read, that we don't want to give up, we don't want to stop, we want always more. That's how our societies develop. So these are all more of something. And then there is also other motivations behind it. So there is maybe something about lower your room temperature, but we say it the way that, do you want to sleep well? So actually lower your room temperature. So always kind of try to bind it with something which brings a good life, and not just the environmental action. Then when we had 100 smart actions, we kind of realized right away that nobody goes through the 100 actions, and it's really a big job. So we did the lifestyle test. Again, it's a carbon footprint calculator, but we don't call it that way. We call it a lifestyle, it's kind of a test your life. And it gives you your CO2 emissions, but it also gives the suggested actions from the 100 smart actions. So this is the good way, and this has been hugely popular. It has been done already over 1 million times, and we are only 5.5 million people. So it's a huge amount of our people that have done it, and we never expected this kind of a success. Well, it's 28 questions. It's really easy, and it gives you also a profile in the end. So kind of a funny profile. We touched upon the test making scheme that has been in the social media. So if you want to, there are a lot of those viral tests that the tests are if you are what kind of a coffee cup you are or something like that. So this came with the same scheme, and it went viral. So people were kind of sharing the profiles that, so I'm this, what kind of you are, and that's how it went really successful. Also, we had a social media year clock on this, so we did a campaigning and all that. So success doesn't happen just without that. Here are some key numbers. So 1 million times the test has been done. Also, 53% of Finns have deliberately reduced their consumption based on the environmental reasons. Then we have 80% feel, because we did also survey about the feelings of environmental, is there angst or something. So 80% feel that pursuing sustainable lifestyle helps them to address those feelings that arise. And also we have the Commitment 2050 platform in our Prime Minister's office, and over there 30% of average reduction in personal carbon footprint in the first year if somebody has committed. Now, last year we have gathered all our tools together. So kind of on the left are the principles that we believe in, because also in addition to these two tools, we have done about 60 experiments with NGOs, organizations, companies, workplaces, and now we want to share all the knowledge and all the learnings that we have had. And on the left, we have the principles. So we always believe it's human-centered. You need to frame everything positive. It's from peer to peer, not from up to down. You need to piggyback with other motives. You kind of keep to enhance this explorer mindset, so continuous learning, and also that it's a science put action, that they're actually facts and not just the beliefs that you think. And we have this Shift 1.5 methods and tools. So if anyone is interested, just be in touch with me. And here are just some background reports that we have. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sari, and I'm sure there will be questions on this. I'll also be happy to come back to you on this bringing about lasting change and kind of how these kind of tools can help, and how can we also measure this lasting change. So I'll come back to you on that later. To finish off, we have as a respondent, we have Baynham-Herd, who's Associate Advisor from the Behavioural Insights team. We are very delighted to have you join and provide some reactions and reflections on how we can engage citizens in climate action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Annika, and yeah, I hope you can hear me okay. Yeah, the first thing is I'm coming at this a bit like Hendrik from a behavioural science lens, and thinking through that. What I've heard today already from all the other respondents really chimes with two key principles in applying behaviour science. So the first is go with the grain of human behaviour. So as humans, we often like to take the path of least resistance, and we often follow the behaviour of others. So today we've already heard how this is actually being applied. For instance, Hendrik talked a bit about social comparisons in energy use. We had Damyana talking a bit about making pledges, so we're much more likely to enact behaviours when we make public pledges about them. Heather talked about the importance of awareness, of incentives, and Sari just now on motivations particularly. So it's really important to go with the grain of human behaviour, to make the desired behaviour change that we want to see as easy as possible, and to make sure that people are aware of what other people are doing and they can follow the positive behaviours. So that's probably the first principle I want to get across. And the second would be to test. So I think we had a little bit about this from Sari just now in terms of running pilots. But what we do at the Behavioural Insights team, which we think is really important to apply to policy everywhere, and whether you're producing products or policies, is to run experiments and pilots to test what works. So we've all talked a bit about how we're applying behaviour change in quite new ways to quite sort of big and new problems, and some of these are going to be really effective, some of these methods, some of them are a bit less effective. So it's really important to run controlled trials where we can test a particular incentive or policy or motivation with a particular group of people, and compare that to testing a situation without that particular policy or motivation, and see how that compares. So I think from my perspective, what we've had is really encouraging, and I'll just reiterate the need to go with the flow of human behaviour, to think about all the different sort of motivations that Sari was talking about that drive us, to make behaviours easier, to make them more attractive, to intervene at the right moment. For instance, we're often more likely to change our habits when we're maybe starting a new endeavour, a new job, or moving house, and can really sort of harness these moments for change. and then to test them, make sure we know what works and try and apply that across the rest of Europe and the rest of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Recognizing that, Damyana, you'll have to leave in a few minutes, so I just want to give you a chance to react to what you've heard, if there are any key takeaways that you'll be taking from the discussion you've heard so far.
Thank you very much. Indeed, it was very interesting to hear also what the other speakers had to say, and I think I might also implement some of the insights into the Climate Pact in the few weeks that we have left. For instance, what you said about the correlation between knowing and doing. I think this reflects very well the two pillars that we have come up for the Climate Pact, and we would like these two indeed to work as a virtual circle, that the two reinforce each other. Basically hoping that the more we know about climate change, the more aware we are, then also the more action we will be doing. I wanted to add also one more element when we spoke about climate denials and also the soft skepticism, that maybe there is also another dimension. This is again something that our executive vice president mentions often, and it's about climate desperation, because there is also a group in society that thinks it's already too late. It looks too catastrophic, so whatever we do, it would not make any change. And I think it's important to address also these concerns and to show that if we start acting now, and also the earlier the better, it is still possible to do this change and to achieve the climate transformation in the society, and the economy that we are aiming for. But definitely very interesting insights, and I think that we will be in touch also in the next weeks and months and beyond, when we launch the Climate Pact, and when we want to hear also more from other stakeholders and organizations how we can work together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Damyana. And indeed, thank you for taking part in the discussion, and we'll be sharing the questions with you that will come forward during the discussion. I'll be happy to give the other speakers a chance to react to what you've heard from each other. If there were interesting points made that you would like to react to, this is a chance before we move on to the Q&A with the audience. Just indicate, should you be, yes, Heather.
Just a quick one. I mean, I think it would be wonderful if the Commission took up the Citra test and made it part of the Climate Pact. That's just such an obvious thing to do, given that there's this correlation. Just get people to test themselves. I mean, Hendrik talked earlier about the careful strategic line between encouraging and enforcing. Well, empowering is also rather important, and you can empower people through knowledge. And, you know, I wouldn't know exactly what my score would be on that test, and whether it would be about reducing flights or heating, for example. Both are important, clearly, but which one would make more difference and by how much? So I think making that available in more countries, which I know Citra is doing, and of course in the United States, you have rolled it out in Canada already, which is interesting, but rolling it out in the 27 EU member states would be a big gift of Finland to the rest of Europe.
Thank you very much. And Hendrik, you wanted to come in? Yeah,
maybe to directly follow up on that, because you mentioned the word empowering, and I think that's a very important concept at the moment. And in fact, the European Commission has, for example, a communication on empowering the consumers in the green transition. And some of the things I talked about hint towards that, for example, labeling, to make it easier. One of the goals to make it easier for people to repair the products they use, because this is historically, like, there's this huge problem of obsolescence, planned obsolescence. People don't have the right tools, especially if there are design aspects that change over time. So people then have to upgrade to a newer phone, and then suddenly they cannot exchange their battery, for example. And it's, for some of, especially IT products, it's very difficult to upgrade, to repair them. There, for example, is one important aspect where people should be empowered to decide themselves if they want to get a new product, or if they want to repair their old product. And one important, very important aspect also relating to empowerment is, I think, empowering people to be able to spot, identify, and counter misinformation on climate change. I mean, you know, it's probably fair to say that's a much bigger problem in the United States, but still, someone just said soft skepticism can turn into hard or skepticism or real or even science denial. And people need to have the tools. They need to know where to find the responsible information. The European Commission is one actor that can provide this information, but if people don't trust the European Commission, and we know there are people who don't trust, there need to be other actors that are maybe more trustworthy and that need to transport this information to make people more resilient and more empowered to counter this type of misinformation.
Absolutely, and I think linked to that, it's not only the science behind climate change, but as has been reflected in the discussion today, is that while a lot of people have concerns about climate change, and we also talked about people being actually depressed because they don't know what to do. So it's really, the question is also that what are the adequate, concrete, doable and meaningful recommendations that can be given to people, and so that it's easy for people to digest and think that actually I can contribute. And for that, I'll be happy to ask you that indeed, what are the channels for providing these kind of recommendations? Citra is one organization doing this, but what are the other organizations that could help in this? And we also know that the messenger matters, and who delivers these messages is extremely important. So any insight who you think is most reliable and respectable voice in that regard, who can help to guide people in that regard. Sari?
Yeah, so I think it should come from very close. So wherever the people are moving, where they are doing their hobbies or anything, it should come from there. So of course there can be a platform where all of the organizations can get the information, but it's kind of like the most impactful information comes really close. So we have, for example, worked with the sports clubs, worked with the Finnish Olympic Committee and made there the kind of tools for sports clubs to how they embed their in their work or in their activities the sustainability. So it should come very close. That's the most impactful way.
And Hendrik, I'll come to you. I wanted to come back to the previous question I had about bringing about permanent change. And so how have you been able to evaluate whether people have actually taken measures that have actually changed their habits permanently?
Yeah, well, I didn't kind of explain or present the third tool. So we have this Commitment 2050 platform in our Vice President Prime Minister's office net web pages, and there you can do a pledge or commitment, and you can actually make, first you do the test, and then there's a planning tool that you can kind of tick the boxes which actions you're going to make, and right away you can see how much that lowers your test result. So and then you can commit to this, and from there we can see the people are doing for the first year the 30% of commitment to lower their CO2 emissions, and also this platform sends them kind of the reminders that have you done that. We can't really get have they done it right away, so we can't get that data yet, but we're working on that. But that's the closest that we have really now, that we can see their plan, what do they commit to.
Great, thank you. And Hendrik, sorry, you wanted to come?
Yeah, I just wanted to shortly say something on the aspect, who should be the messenger. And I think there it's very important also from a scientific perspective. So people, even especially nowadays, they can choose whom they like, from which sources they consume the information, and they can basically choose whom to trust. And we all know that if you are looking for a certain piece of information that maybe says exactly what you already believe, you will find that information in the internet somewhere. And then you can find, people are very good at finding they're convincing themselves that this information is based on the best standards and it's trustworthy and I like the source and stuff like this. So it can lead to echo chambers on social media, to filter bubbles. So filter bubbles are an aspect that increases this even. And So trustworthiness in sources, I think it's on the one hand very important to understand these processes better. And then I think what is key, and we have also seen this, I think, during the COVID pandemic, or we're still seeing it, that scientists, but also governments need to learn how to properly communicate scientific results. And more or less, I personally think it's important to be a bit more direct about the uncertainty that surrounds certain communications. So we need to be better. So we, as I mean, the European Commission, but primarily scientists, to be better at saying the findings mean so much and they cannot be generalized to other aspects. They cannot be generalized to this. So to make sure that people understand what the findings entails, for what they can be used and for what they should not be used. I think that's very important. Also to increase trust in the European Commission, for example.
Very good. We have already several questions. I'll read out two of the questions that have been posed by the audience. So we have Emilio Miranda Graham, who's asking that to what extent is it anticipated that this information may actually hinder greener behavioral change among EU citizens? And then we have Klaus Kordowski, who's asking, and this may be a question for Hendrik, that are there any scientific insights into the cost effectiveness of climate / energy awareness campaigns that are addressing individual behavior? And I'll also would be happy to give a chance for Claire Itzeaga to ask a question. My colleagues can unmute you so that you can ask your question.
Claire, you are self-muted. You need to unmute you.
If Claire is not there at the moment, we can unmute Tina Zurnazzi, who wanted to ask a question to the audience. We can unmute you now. If you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you very much. My name is Tina Zurnazzi. I'm the head of strategic communications in the European Commission. I'm very glad that I signed up to this because we're planning very big campaign on the Green Deal. In fact, it's going to be a corporate campaign and it's going to link up all the different parts of the Green Deal, and its target audience are going to be citizens, and not just to raise awareness of them about what the Commission does and what the climate issues are, but indeed to bring about behavioral change. So we've been looking at this aspect for quite a while with our colleagues inside and outside the Commission. We've been looking at all kinds of different ways to do that, and the campaign is in the making, so it's still not rolled out. But I was fascinated by Sari's work and what you have been doing in Finland. We'd love to link up with you. Because you point at a lot of things that we have seen as possible, impediments, that we can't keep taking away things from people. We have to provide, this benefit of what are we talking about, this narrative that it's going to help your life, better quality of your life, better health, better social aspects, and all the other narratives that you have identified. So I'm very happy to hear that. It's more to say that this is coming. We're working very close with Damyana also on the Climate Pact, because it's going to be about individual action, and the pledging that they're going to do on the Climate Pact is going to help us a lot. Well, the difference between what we're trying to do with our campaign is that we're going to try to go out to people who are not thinking about this in their daily life, and not, the already convinced, or those who are even gloomy about this, or the climate desperate, as you say. We want to go out to the average person who thinks that they have enough things to worry about. There's actually this great concept I heard, the what is it? area of worry that you,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. So you can only worry about so many things at a time, and now people are worrying about the pandemic and whether they're going to have a job in a couple of months, or even already they have lost it. So you really need to focus on accentuating the positive. And when you do get to people's to actually undertake action, make sure that's the right thing, because using less plastic bags is not it's a great thing, but it's not, as Sari said, going to do much for climate. So you can only ask so many things from them, and we need to be sure what we ask is going to be impactful, and that we don't kind of get into the situation where I do everything, I don't have a car, I do all these other great things, but then I go take the plane every weekend and go on city trips, and I think I'm an environmentalist in every other way, but allow me this little luxury. So I mean, I don't want to go into all the different aspects that this what it means about policy, and about how do we make this hierarchy of impactful actions more visible to citizens. And one last point I'd like to say is that we don't have to convince everyone to take actions, to think about climate change, but we can convince them to take action that goes in the right direction of climate change. And this is what a lot of the Commission initiatives, like the Renovation Wave, the Farm to Fork, eat better, eat healthier, that are going to do. So I'd love to hear more about this, Sari, and thanks to everyone for very good presentations.
Thank you so much. I'll be happy to turn to our panelists for reactions to the comments, the questions we've heard. Who would like to go first?
I can go first.
Yes.
Yes, great. Be in contact, Tina. Definitely we can call and plan something together. Also, I think we have these motivation profiles from Finland, so 7 different kind of people. That there are these traditional voice of reasons and hedonist, and then there is a feel-good green person who is more of this hipster type, who is exactly the type of a person who would kind of consume and kind of get the meaning from the consuming, and that's his luxury, but then again can fly to Bali, just for heck of it, because that's kind of forgot the environmentalist for a second. So these are the different kinds of people that we are actually dealing with. But also there is also like really black and white discussion, I think, with the people. So amongst us, so like veganism, somebody is vegan, somebody is not. And based on our research, 85% of veganism is enough. So kind of we always try to bring these kind of gray areas, that you don't need to be kind of this or this or this or that. You can be environmentally friendly person without being something in a one end of the scale. So that's also a discussion that is good to have.
Thank you. Yes, Zach.
Thanks, Sari. I think I might be guilty of being a feel-good green. I'm not too sure. Maybe I fit that bucket. But I just wanted to make a comment. I was kind of reflecting on what Tina was talking about how to encourage people to sort of do these behaviours. One way to do it is what we were sort of covered previously about awareness and giving people the right access to knowledge. The other way of doing it, because often awareness doesn't always follow through to behaviour, is to actually get people to do the behaviour by whatever means. And then sometimes they come up with their own reasons to justify that behaviour, and that may actually change their sort of levels, their sort of attitudes, or maybe they go and find out more on information about it. So there are different ways to sort of go about the problem, sort of actual awareness raising, or just maybe showing what other people are doing. One really good initiative, I think, hopefully in the UK we're going to roll out soon. The other country, I think Norway has done it before, is green number plates, and that's a really good example of showing people, rather than telling people the statistic about how many people have electric vehicles, actually showing them by having green number plates for electric vehicles is quite a good way of doing that, I think, at least.
Great. Hendrik, Heather, do you want to jump in? Yes, Hendrik.
Yeah, I mean, I can say something on the first 2 questions. So if I remember correctly, the first question was if disinformation on climate change can actually have an effect on behavior. And to that, I think it's difficult to find out, because it's very difficult to know what is the cause. So do people consume disinformation and this affects their behavior? Or do people that for various reasons don't want to show green behavior just communicate this type of information? So it's very difficult, I think, to get the real causal effect. And this is one aspect, for example, is very interesting. It's called solution aversion. So there's a finding that people who don't like the solutions that are proposed for climate change, which often rely on market-based interventions. This was from a US American sample. Because they don't like the solution, they are saying, well, the problem doesn't exist. So they are denying the problem as a means for them to not having to deal with the solutions that they don't like. And I think this exemplifies a bit this problem of correlation and cause. And the second question was regarding the cost effectiveness of educational campaigns. I can say something on the cost effectiveness of behavioral interventions, for example, nudges. So nudges is one of the keywords, so it's behavioral intervention. And there's not much research, but what many behavioral interventions have in common is that they are very easy to implement. They don't need much money. For example, the social norm, it's just a graph in your electricity bill that you get either way. So it doesn't cost much. And even so, I think in the USA, they measured just a reduction of 2%, I think, of energy efficiency, but the costs were basically zero, and they were just upfront costs, not constant costs. So the cost effectiveness was very high, and it was much higher than, for example, electricity discounts, so cost discounts, for example, because cost discounts, so reducing the cost might have a bigger effect, but it also costs the implementer something. And that being said, I think there's still a much need for further research. And just one general remark I would like to make is, because we said something about the attitude behavior gap. So people that think climate change is important do not necessarily do something about it. I think what is very, very important is to make green behavior as easy as possible. So it's make it easy for people to be green. And I think just very, very one practical thing would be in Europe to make green electricity the default electricity contract. Because many people are too lazy to change their contract to a green alternative, even if they would like to, they just don't do it. And if it would, I mean, now the default is gray. Why is it not the other way around? I know that there are reasons for this, and also some studies saying that there's not the capacity enough for everyone to have green electricity. But I think this, for example, would be an example to make the green option the easiest that you can think of.
Yes, Heather. Yes, and I can't but second to what Hendrik just said about making the easy option, the sustainable option, the default option.
And there's a particular reason to do that right now, both to increase the level of public education about these things, but also to make it the default options. And that's that a wall of money is coming at Europe from the fossil fuel industry to try to prevent the Green Deal from going fast enough and far enough, because there are massive economic interests in the current system. System change is not welcome to those who have a lot of assets, a lot of investment in the current system. And so the point that Hendrik made earlier about misinformation and the need to counter that, this is going to get bigger. As both the countries and the companies that depend on selling their gas, their oil, their coal and various other things to Europe will be opposing these changes. And we've seen how quickly misinformation can undermine democratic choices and indeed policy changes in other areas. So this is the moment to make those defaults, to change the defaults. It's something that can be done at EU level. For example, the new taxonomy can be used as a basis for all kinds of changes in how people see the value of their car, or the value of their petrol-driven car, for example, or indeed which choices they're making as regards their how to heat their homes. So I think bringing in nudge, bringing in behavioural insights, hugely valuable, but it's also really vital to set the defaults differently right now, because it's going to get harder to do this. We're now at the maximum point of the wave in terms of political will, in terms of public acceptability. We've still got Fridays for the Future going on, and at the moment relatively little corporate resistance from fossil fuel exporters. It's not going to stay like that. So I think now is the moment that policymakers must seize. And yes, pacts are great, and I'm very glad to see public communications is happening. There also actually needs to be policy measures to entrench them in law so that things can move forward faster.
And I could just add on there that we have tools like the multi-annual financial framework, the recovery fund, with a lot of money being put on the table. So it's extremely, or should be essential, that the money is actually spent in line with the priorities we've set for ourselves, because if we are actually spending money to encourage harmful practices, all this nudging and behavioral insights, there are limits how much it can do. We have several other questions from the audience, so I'll be happy to pick on these. So, question from Sara Viitanen: how could we better engage the youth in climate action and listen to their needs? And how do you see, also from behavioral science perspective, is the youth responding well to the same actions and nudges that are encouraged across society? And then we have a question from Eftimia Divi from TIC Council. How do you consider using certification based on international standards to ensure the trustworthiness of products and the sustainability claims and labels in products? And then I would like to come back again to Claire Iseaga, and we'll unmute you if you can unmute yourself if you want to pose your question. So my colleagues will unmute you now. Are you able to ask a question? If not, then I'll turn to the panelists to respond to the questions that were posed by the audience. Who would like to go first? Youth, anyone? Comments on that? Yes, Jack.
Thank you, Annika. Yeah, the youth question's a really interesting one, and something which I heard about recently, which to sort of add into the mix, is according to some surveys, so this was one done in the UK recently, the older generations often do more sustainable behaviours as sort of on a small scale, individual things like recycling, so that's their food choices, whereas maybe in this survey at least, the younger people talked about wanting to do them more. So there may be some opportunity for a bit of knowledge sharing, maybe between generations, that kind of thing. Or also equally, maybe it's important to think about what are the conditions in your sort of environment that allow you to actually do a behaviour. So is it more easy to recycle when you've got quite sort of predictable sort of habits or a timetable, or maybe you have the actual equipment, the right bins, that kind of thing. So thinking both about our intentions, but also about our sort of immediate physical and social environment around us that actually enables us to do these behaviours is probably quite important. And then the second point on youth is, and it's kind of, I think, mirrors some of the points Heather was talking about sustaining action for the long term. My perception would be, whatever we want young people to be doing, we've sort of got to be able to, they've got to be able to keep doing it for a long period of time and not kind of burn out, and not sort of think that it's sort of they're not getting anywhere, or it's pointless, or they've got to sort of remain optimistic. So both those two things: one, making the environment most sort of optimum for actually enacting these behaviour changes, and two, making it sustainable so people can actually keep doing them for quite a long period of time.
Thank you. And Sari?
Yeah, we have done twice a survey of kind of listed the 100 smart actions and then asked, are you doing it or not doing it? And based on those surveys, like Zach said, that older people are doing the traditional sustainable actions like recycling or so forth, or repairing things. But then the younger people are doing new ones like sharing economy things, or mobility as a service, technology products, or veganism, kind of the new things, or new vegetarian protein products, and all these that the younger people are doing those, older people are doing the traditional sustainability actions. So that's what we see in our surveys.
Very good, Hendrik.
Yeah, maybe on the first question. So if I understood it correctly, also relating to whether behavioral interventions work maybe better or worse for younger people. And I think so. I am not aware of any like very important research on the effect of age, but for example, other factors that correspond to age, that correlate with age, might be important. For example, income. So younger people maybe have a lower income, and on the one hand, it's probably easier for them to just do green behaviors because they don't have to give up so much, because I mean they're not consuming that much anyway because they don't have the income. On the other hand, it can also, I think there's some starting to emerge some evidence that people with lower incomes are also more reacting to behavioral interventions. But I think it's just a very exploratory and early research on this. One important research line is related to cognitive scarcity, so that people that have to worry a lot about their money, their income, maybe even their debt, they don't have the necessary cognitive resources to think about stuff. So it's a bit like you could measure it with a temporary reduction in your IQ, because you have to worry about other things. You're tunneling, you're focusing on your debt or on your monetary terms, and this could I mean, in principle, at least make you a bit more responsive to behavioral interventions, because many behavioral interventions rely on nudging you somewhere without you being necessarily aware. I myself have done an experiment on this where I haven't found such an effect, but I think another research did find an effect. And it's also very early research on this. And the second question, if I remember correctly, was relating to sustainability labels and trust in labels. And of course, the more labels you have, and I think everyone can, or every company can just develop their own label. And of course, because if you then have some products have labels, you lose the trust if you maybe in all of them, if just one or two of them are not trustworthy. And I think that the Commission is also trying to make it more structured and less complex, to create trustworthy labels. For example, a sustainability label should at some point emerge, but it's, for example, if such a label should communicate the carbon footprint of a product. Just think about how many different products there are. Tesco in the UK tried to come up with such a label just for that product, and they gave up because no one else joined them. They couldn't just do it by themselves. So this is a huge task also. Yes.
Very good. Heather, yes.
Yeah, just a quick one, because I'd like to know what Sari thinks about this. But just one thing that emerges in a lot of studies of young people, particularly the very young, those under the age of 25, is that there are two reasons where they are more willing to do things, but there's also an important one where they're less willing. So the two where they're more willing is they've got less investment in the existing system. You know, they need mobility and they need a place to sleep. They don't necessarily think that they want a car or they want to own a house. That's older people who already have more money. They've made those investments at some previous point in their lives. And similarly, they tend to be more flexible in their thinking about future employment prospects, because they've got lots of different skills. They can see the labour market will change. They've got prospects still. They have time to retrain and to use their skills in new industries. So, I mean, the classic example is always given, have you trained as a coal miner? Can you work as an engineer of a wind turbine? Well, if you're 21 years old, that's much more likely than if you're 52 years old. And so they're going to be more interested in and more willing to see change. But of course, the one thing, and I think this comes out in the profiles that Citra has done, is they really want to travel. And that's the tricky part. How do you persuade people under the age of 25 that in future taking a very long distance flight is a luxury that you would do once a year, and that a city breaks are actually really emission intensive? So I think that's a tricky one, but there are answers to this too. You know, cheap long distance train travel on high-speed trains that can also do the job. So I think that but it is really important to consider this, because that's where all the political energy is coming from. And that's also where younger people tend to be much more radical in their thinking in any case, but they are the ones who can drive the rest of society on this issue. You know, this is their 1968, this is their 1989. It of course actually affects all the rest of us, but in terms of political mobilization, it's like that. Thanks.
Very good. I actually would like to pick on that and come back to Sari, as you've been collecting data on which habits people should and could change. And obviously, it's extremely valuable if this data can be better utilized to support policy and decision making and actually help to design effective policy where we know that there are less barriers for people to change behaviors, etc. So it would be great if you could just pick on that and tell a bit more kind of what were your findings, what would you see, at least in the Finnish case, being some of the action points that policymakers really should utilize. For example, if we're deciding on what we should subsidize, should we be subsidizing electric vehicles or, for example, plant-based food? Is there evidence for you to tell at least the Finnish policymakers what they should be turning their focus on?
Yeah, well, this is the area that we are just now turning on. So we've been collecting the data and now we are thinking, so, hey, we have this data, what should we do with it? So this is the new development step that we're going to take forward. We've been looking at it a bit already. So of course, it's the data that we can point to the individual. So individuals we can see, but we can see kind of the locations where the answers come from, or where especially the planning tool, what they have chosen to their commitment. So those are very valuable information, maybe for the local decision makers or the companies who are designing products and services, kind of supporting the sustainable lifestyle. So this is the step that we are now actually taking on, and also want to develop that, how we gonna create these dashboards of data for different stakeholders, that we could provide them easy access to data and see what people want, what people are doing already, or where they are ready to move on. So what kind of maybe reward systems you can build on some products or services, and so on. So I can't say anything special about the data yet, but this is exactly our next step.
Very interesting. Looking forward to that next step. I would have a final question to all of the panelists, and this is also the final round for any final remarks you would like to make. But coming back to the societal dimension, we obviously were very much influenced what people around us think about the issues, and it would be great to hear how you see how we could use different tools to break through the societal and cultural barriers. And also we've talked about the role for communities also here today. So how do you see, how could we work more with communities? We heard the examples from Citra, but happy to hear other thoughts you may have on how we could work with communities to empower them to make changes to their practices as a community rather than as and individuals. And are there some communities that you think are the first ones that the policymakers should be targeting, different organizations should be targeting, that can be extremely influential in bringing about bigger change as well? And indeed, I'll be happy to have any final reactions from you as we move forward. And there is this climate pact, there is this growing awareness that we need to try to empower individuals, bring them to the effect part, to be part of the puzzle. So are there any final recommendations you would like to pose, provide to the policymakers, especially to EU policymakers, that they should not forget as they hope to engage with citizens in this action? Who would like to go first? Maybe I'll give Sari, is it okay if I start with you?
Okay, so we have worked a lot with the communities, and I think the community is the key in our change to sustainable lifestyle and circular economies, because it's all about the sharing and it's all about kind of sharing the knowledge, sharing the products, sharing it. So it works in a communities close by, neighborhoods, your sports club, your hobby group. I think I believe in those. What is the key to the next step is that kind of think of the whole lifestyle, not just the, even though product labeling is important, but nobody goes to the shop and looks all the products and kind of reads with the app what is this. So it's more of a holistic lifestyle change. So we need to think of it, the big chunks of how we consume this world. So and also sustainable lifestyle isn't that it's not the rocket science. So when you know kind of the basics of it, it's pretty simple. So kind of just build it aspirational, build it the way that people want to do the things, show how that actually builds you a good life, not just a sustainable life, but better life.
Very good. Hendrik, if I can turn to you.
Yes, so I would focus more on the point you raised on how to break through cultural and society barriers. And I think that's a very, very interesting question, also very, very difficult to answer, because I think it's very difficult to break through. I mean, these are norms that have evolved over years and years and years, and it's difficult to break through them with just one thing or within just a couple of years. But I think to some extent they can also be, so this characteristic can also be used in order to progress. So to use maybe social norms. So if there is a certain critical mass in a certain culture, to use this information in order to try to get the other half or maybe a third of the population to also go into the greener direction. Because I mean, people are social animals, and there are some groups that want to be different from the mainstream, but mostly people want to belong, to have a feeling of belonging to a certain group, and to maybe make this feeling of belonging to this group, to this more salient, so more feelable, more experienceable by people, would be important, or an important factor to make green the norm. And for my final remark, just based on this and also what I already said, I think one of the most important things is to make the green alternative just as easy as possible, just the lowest point, the lowest path of the path of lowest resistance to the extent possible. And I think then in an interplay with social norms, they can have a quite substantial impact.
Thank you. Zach, would you like to go?
Thank you, Annika. I think I'll just echo what Hendrik and Sari have been saying already, that we need to make it as easy as possible for people to do those sort of greener behaviours. So maybe that's replacing a million decisions with one decision, which is maybe which supermarket to go to rather than which products to buy at every supermarket. To make it as easy as possible, as Hendrik was saying, utilise the importance of social norms. How do we make behaviours as attractive as possible? So as Sari and Heather talked about earlier in terms of incentives and motivations. And then lastly, choosing the right moment to intervene, to have when should you put policy in place, or when should you enact a campaign. So yeah, it's the behavioural insights team sort of framework of easy, attractive, social and timely. So there you go, I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Heather?
Thanks. Yes, it's clear behavioural insights are incredibly valuable at this moment when you need encouragement, you need stick and carrot. But of course, behavioural insights are something which is used alongside coercive measures that governments have at their disposal, such as legislation and taxes and other incentives like that. So it's actually about changing the entire incentive structure that people face on a daily basis. So it's the classic behavioural insight nudge thing of having the fresh fruit available near the till when you're buying your sandwich rather than the chocolate bars. Okay, that's an obvious one. But it's also the price of meat, for example. Should industrially produced meat actually be a lot more expensive than organically produced meat to reflect its environmental impact? Because at the moment, abusing nature is free. It increases your competitiveness as a farmer. So there need to be these structural changes in, for example, the common agricultural policy, in our tax systems. I live in Belgium, for example, where absolutely the most tax efficient thing you can do as an individual or as a company is to provide company cars for absolutely everybody on your payroll, regardless of their level of seniority. And as a result, Belgium's roads are clogged, air quality is poor, emissions are terrible when it comes to vehicles. And in fact, people who would be willing to take public transport, which is pretty good in Belgium, have a car foisted upon them. So we need to see taxation and regulation alongside behavioural insights, and it's getting the combination of those right, which is absolutely critical, because individuals are willing to take action. And as the impact of climate change, from wildfires to floods to rising sea levels to simply the changes in winters no longer being so cold and summers being much more wet or much too dry, as these changes impinge on people's lives year on year, they will be more willing to see those changes. But we don't have very much time. So this is the moment to unite the behavioural insights with the power of government to make the changes happen.
Thank you, Heather, for these concluding remarks. I can't but agree that while we've touched upon an extremely important part of the puzzle, the individuals, the communities, in the end, they can be only as powerful as the rest of the system is, and it's essential that all the forces are united in this effort. Thank you so much for joining the discussion. It's been a delight. I will be leaving this discussion with optimism. I think that we have a lot of tools that we can use to move forward, and I think that that's always a good starting point. Thank you so much for our panelists. Thank you for Open Society European Policy Institute, as well as for Citra, the Finnish Innovation Fund, for cooperating and organizing this discussion. It's been a delight, and we from the EPC side, we really look forward to engaging in discussion and trying to find how we can empower the different parts of the puzzle as we move forward, keeping in mind that the 2030 climate goals, the 2050 climate neutrality, it will require a system-wide transformation, and we will need all players in this game. So very much looking forward to engaging with you and engaging with our audience in future discussions we'll be organizing on the topic. So wishing everyone a very, very good afternoon, and looking forward to staying in touch. Bye.